Brandon Thomas, the beat writer for the Binghamton Mets in Binghamton. He writes for the Press Sun Bulletin. You can check him out online at pressconnects.com. Brandon, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And Brandon, a few good prospects in Binghamton. You got two pitchers in Brad Holt, Eddie Coons. Are there any players that are getting called up to the Bisons in the near future?
It depends on what happens with Bison's health, really. BMets pitchers in general had kind of a rough start, so the team's definitely going to see how they handle some of the struggles they've had early before they send them up to a different level. Eddie Coons' situation is particularly different because they've converted him to a starter this year, and he hasn't started since high school, so this is all brand new to him. He made it out of the fifth inning for the first time pretty recently, so he's a little ways from getting called up for sure. And a bunch of the other names, they're going to have to string together 3, 4, maybe even 5 good starts before they promote them.
Offensively, are there going to be any prospects getting called up?
Well, it depends. It depends on what kind of openings there are. I mean, quite frankly, there are guys who can hit up in Buffalo right now. Nick Evans is a guy who's raking at Double-A this year. He just came off the DL with an oblique strain, but he was arguably the best hitter in the league before that. But they're all set at first base there in Buffalo with Mike Jacobs accepting his assignment, and I think he's had some injury issues. But they have tons of depth up there, and they are content to let Nick kind of hone his skills at Double-A. A guy like Zach Lutz is up from High A, playing third base for the B-Mets, but he's tied for the league lead with home runs. They certainly have bats, but I think they're content to let him stay at the Double-A level unless they prove that they're just bored here. But I haven't seen that yet. They're good. They're just developing. It'll be a little bit.
And you touched on Nick Evans. He's a player that New York Met fans can relate to. Bison's fans know a little bit. He saw some time in the pros, and I believe it was 2008. But then the next year, he just played awful in Buffalo. And then he's been with the B-Mets, ever since. He came off the DL. But can you kind of go into more detail about how he's just been playing since he's been back?
Well, I mean, he didn't miss a beat from the beginning of the season on. I think a lot of people were a little surprised that he started in Binghamton, but it was really a good move by the organization because he had a fresh start. He had, like you said, he had just about as bad of a start as you can imagine last year in Buffalo, and to send him back here and not have him, kind of worry about having the same start in the same place. They put him more back at a familiar position for him at first base, where he's been playing all this year. And it's really showed. I mean, he's been pretty comfortable at the plate. He's going the opposite way, no problem, just like always. And he was hitting to the tune of near 400 for a couple of weeks. But with Nick, he's an intense guy. So I think for him to just be able to put last year behind him was a big part of the equation, because he certainly got the talent. As you said, he was in the majors at age 22, at least part-time. So he'll get there eventually. It's just a matter of kind of keeping it consistent and frankly developing some power, being able to pull the ball. So you'll see him in Buffalo again before too long, I'm sure.
And, Brandon, you're right for the Binghamton Mets. I was born and raised in Binghamton, so I've seen, a lot of stars come up through the system, including David Wright, Jose Reyes, more recently, Ike Davis. I've seen them all play at NYSEG Stadium. Just kind of talk about, from your perspective, what it's like seeing players move on to the next level.
Well, it's the fun of writing at this level and getting to see, I have a lot of hockey experience too, and when you cover the AHL, they're all right, the next step below. But baseball's a little more unique. You have about 4 or 5 steps that even the top prospects go through before they see the light of day in the majors. So it's kind of fun to see what they work on each level. At Double-A, it could be the simplest things, like learning how to hit to the opposite field, so you open up defenses a little more. For pitching, you got to learn how to establish your fastball longer into your starts, into the third inning, when you're not showing a curveball until the fourth inning or so. Little things like that you can kind of keep track of at this level, and watching those things develop and seeing how much of a difference it really makes is kind of fascinating because everyone's different, and so many guys go through year to year. It's a different story every year. It really is.
Brandon Thomas, the beat writer for the Binghamton Mets for the Press Sun Bulletin. You can check him out online at PressConnects.com. And Brandon, Binghamton's been a part of the Mets farm system for several years now. And about a month ago, they extended their contract for another 2 years. So how important is Binghamton to the Mets organization?
Oh, for sure. They're vital to it. I mean, AA is not a step to be taken lightly. The organization has liked what Binghamton has done for, I think it's 19 years or something like that now. They've been here forever, and, it's a good marriage for both sides. Obviously being named the Mets, they would have had to reinvent themselves entirely if the Mets weren't here. So it's a win-win for both sides, clearly.
And Brandon, last year the B-Mets went 54-86 under Mako Olivares. This year they brought in Met great Tim Tuffle. How's he doing as a manager, and what does he do to help his players down there?
Well, Tim Tuffle, if you knew him as a player, I mean, he carries that into his managing skills too. He was kind of an infield platoon guy. I guess later in his career he had more consistent playing time with the Padres, but when he was a Met, he was a platoon guy at second base with Wally Backman when they won the World Series. But he was always kind of this gritty, defense first kind of guy, and that's really where he made his name. And frankly, that's what he wants out of his players. He wants them to be gritty. He wants them to pay attention to the details. He wants them to be aggressive on the base paths. And at the same time, he's not a fly-off-the-handle type. He's very reasonable in his conversations with umpires. He doesn't really get that, worked up over too much. And I think that carries over into the clubhouse, too. Nothing against Mako, but he was a fiery guy, and I think sometimes that spills over to your team. The old adage that your team takes on the mentality of your manager. And I think that kind of new approach from Tim has really kind of made its way into the clubhouse already. And everyone just kind of, they're running with it, and then it's been a good team so far.
And Brandon, I'll let you go on this question. The Mets, obviously one of the bigger market teams in baseball. How does that affect the farm system in Binghamton? Well,
it doesn't affect it too much because at this level, you're pretty with your prospects, and as long as they have them, it's not going to look too different. There are a couple things I can think of. That one, the Mets aren't afraid to go out and pick up some Rule 5 draft guys. That is to say, they can pick guys off of other teams' minor league systems that aren't on the 40-man roster, and then instead of returning them later, they can just buy them out. So it's one of those little things, but they used it very well this year. To get a couple of veteran guys. One, John Lujan, who's actually closing for the Bisons right now, and another one is Marshall Hubbard, who's mainly DHing for the B-Mets, but, he's been a really solid addition, hitting over 300, has some pop in the middle of the lineup. And another difference you see is with these prospects, they're not necessarily hurried as much because the team has enough money to fill holes with veteran guys at more top levels like AAA and the majors. So a guy like Nick Evans isn't going to be rushed this year because they had the money to pick up some depth. And as long as they stay healthy, they won't run into the same situation they had last year.
Brandon Thomas of the Press Sun Bulletin. A lot of great insight of the AA Binghamton Mets. Check them out online at PressConnects.com. Brandon, thanks a lot for your time, and I look forward to having you on in the future.
Great, thanks.